Lucy Steigerwald, it's so nice to see you.
It's lovely to be here.
We met one time, I guess, but this is really sort of our more or less our second meeting, right?
I believe so, yes.
But I listened to your podcast on Liberty.me, which is hugely popular.
I'm glad that you approve. That's I like the approval of my libertarian betters, even if that offends the left libertarians with its latent bossism. I'm sorry about that.
Bossism, yeah. It's a funny word.
It is a funny word. I'm kind of okay with it, I'm not going to lie. But, well...
Yeah, I know what you mean. I feel this way with the left libertarians. It's easy to caricature their views until you actually read their writings, and then, yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. You know, I like the challenge. I don't think of myself as a right libertarian in any case. So.
No, me either. I don't like having a wing. I love the left libertarians. I met a lot at Students for Liberty in February. They're fantastic. I'm not with them, but as you say, I don't feel like a right libertarian by any means either. I don't really get the picking a wing thing.
Right. Well, the other thing is that sometimes people say, well, what is a left libertarian? And it's hard to kind of put your finger on it entirely. Yeah, I guess it's a certain sensitivity to certain causes and issues and things like that. But, yeah, there's such diversity. It seems almost wrong to kind of, you know, clump them all into one category and say, oh, the left libertarians think such and such, you know. There seems like a lot of diversity there.
I've been accused of being a left libertarian just because I said I prioritized the prison and cops and war stuff. Some not very charming libertarian on the internet once told me I was left because of that, but I don't think that followed at all. It's just that, you know, the most obvious life and death and freedom or not issues are kind of most important to me.
Right. Well, you know, Lucy, it wasn't too long ago when libertarians weren't really talking about cops and the police issues and things like that much. I mean, this is a rather new thing. I don't know. You're probably not old enough to remember this, but I remember a time when sort of minimalist state ideology kind of created a sort of tolerance on the part of libertarians towards the police. All of which has come to an end, essentially, since 2008.
Yeah, I don't know my libertarian history is fully. I have some missing spots. It's usually the 90s where I was, you know, a kid. And also don't tell the liberals this because they were being very impolite. I do think that, honestly, Radley Balko, his influence on the issue of caring about the police in libertarian circles, it's huge, and kind of in the world at large, it's huge. And I guess he got his start in like 05 and 06 at Cato and then Reason and stuff. And I know, I mean, I think it came up before that. It's becoming more and more an issue, and I think libertarians can, in some ways, take credit for being on the ball before some people, but also, as good self-critical but not in a malice sort of way people, we should be like, well, we maybe should have been on this a little faster.
Well, I'm completely self-critical in that respect. I mean, it took me a long time to kind of come around and realize, you know, the police, it sounds silly to say it, but the police are really the sort of sharp end of the stick of the state, you know. I mean, that's what it all comes down to. The enforcement arm is the one that you know, has the most direct contact with actual human beings. The bureaucrats and, you know, walled away in ivory palaces in Washington don't actually touch us except through the mails, you know. But it's the cops that are the ones that are the most direct agents of tyranny.
Now, I don't want to like turn this back on you, but why do you think it took that long for you or for other libertarians? Is it because I think there's something to, I've read some critiques of libertarians lately that there's a little something to it, which says that, you know, we are obsessed with the feds and we kind of ignore local stuff. But I think that a lot of people, I mean, the news in general is always stressing federal, national issues. And local stuff isn't really a concern. Local stuff is a cat in a tree down the street sort of things.
Yeah, I think there's something to all those things, but there's an ideological component too, Lucy. I mean, we've always thought of ourselves, I think, as at least my direction was okay. I was, a constitutionalist, and then I became a so-called minarchist, and then finally you let go of that. But there's an ordering in which you let go of
definitely
mental attachment to aspects of the state. And for me, the last thing to go was the service of security provision and justice and enforcement, that sort of thing. So that's the last thing to go, in your ideological apparatus. So you have probably a greater degree of tolerance for the thing that you just only recently cast aside,
That makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But over time, of course, I mean, I can. Well, let me just tell you that there's a book that had a huge influence on me. It's called by Clarence Darrow, called something evil. I forget now the name of it. But he isolates the police power of the state as this, and the jails and justice system as the single most evil aspect of the state. And I realized I had it completely reversed all along. Like the first part of the state that you should sort of mentally detach yourself from is the enforcement apparatus and the police, because it's the night watchman who's the guy who guards the camp, and shoots you when you try to run away. So I had it kind of upside down, I think. But I'm hardly alone in this respect. I mean, hundreds of years have gone by in classical liberal ideology where people did not believe that security could be a market function.
I think that, I don't want to, God knows I'm not let's kick out all the minarchists, for purity's sake or anything. But I think that is often a minarchist flaw. And the person who made me realize this, Balco, who's one of my heroes, does a lot of real-world, practical, moderate sounding, even if in his heart I don't really know, how radical he is, but he does the reporting real-world stuff to convince the people who have never heard the word libertarian that the cops are out of line. But a person who changed my mind and actually made me officially drop the minarchist thing for good was Anthony Gregory, who I saw give a speech in 2010 about, he had two speeches at this Independent Institute conference, and one was delightful, just trashing of the Bill of Rights for being, vague language and not radical enough. And the other was about war, and I had been reading a lot of history stuff and thinking about war, but there was something that finally clicked with, the minarchists want to leave the war and cops and courts, and the life and death, most unsubtle and literal freedom or not thing, and those are the most dangerous. They really are. And something about that finally I was like, oh, of course.
Lucy, there's another factor here too, and it's fairly interesting. People don't entirely realize this, but the financial crisis of 2008 put a tremendous fiscal strain on local budgets, and the police became tax collectors for their own little miniature states over which they, sort of ruled, and also they had pension programs that they had to fund. So it became, like the Middle Ages. I mean, in the Middle Ages, the tax collectors worked on a kind of commission system. They'd go out and shake down people and be able to keep half of whatever they earned. And that's essentially what happened with the police since 2008. They just began to kind of become revenue agents, basically.
Yeah, and that's
and became very cool.
I was going to say that's kind of a way, an inroad to making, I think, other people maybe be aware that cops aren't so good. Libertarians get criticized for you're caring about sort of small issues that, a rich middle-aged white man cares about, and speeding tickets or speed traps, red light cameras, anything where it is just this little small financial thing. But it of course, it all ties together, as you said. And Balco again did this long piece about. He went down to Missouri and where all the horrible Ferguson controversy and anger has been happening since that shooting last month. And he just reported on what he's calling the criminalization of poverty, where there are all these court costs and these other fees that if you're lucky enough to be wealthier, then you can pay to make a fee go away. But for someone who has less money, someone who absolutely can't miss a day of work, there's this whole element where it's going to add up, and you can ruin somebody's life very easily with a couple of fines they can't pay. So it's just one of those things. Law and Order has all these different tendrils in all these different areas, and it's one of those things that if you started to pay attention, I think almost everybody would start to think something's not right here.
Lucy, that is really a very poignant comment. I'm now recalling there was a time when I decided to fight a ticket, which is the dumbest thing ever, and I sat all day in a court, and it changed many aspects of my outlook on life. I mean, I saw how people were being looted and pillaged and having their lives ruined by this judge, but I also saw something else, and that was the way in which the white bourgeoisie, you know, basically find ways around the system because they know the cop or they know the judge, they have a good attorney or whatever, and the real victims of this abusive system were, just from my day in sitting in the court, were almost entirely poor blacks. Mm-hmm. And I realized that these human beings were being used as fodder, you know, in a very cruel system, and it shocked me, really. I mean, I had a sense, like I would look at, there was glass windows in the room, and I had a sense that if I took a cinder block and busted out the glass and invited all of them to leave, that our community would be vastly better off, rather than having them caged and pillaged and looted and coerced by this cruel system. There was a weird moment of I guess I could say anarchist radicalism that was going on in my head at that moment.
Sometimes these thoughts just come, and that sounds like the place for them. Though sadly, not the place to act on it.
Yeah, right.
Might not be able to get out of that one, even with, yeah.
Yeah, no, bad news. But you know, and you know, the excuse from our hangout actually is, and we had to have a good excuse for it, is to talk about young adult fiction. And one of the things you find in Divergent and Hunger Games and Catching Fire and these sort of things is a very prominent role for the enforcement agents, because in movies the way to illustrate the might and power and despotism of the rulers is through the enforcement. You know, so. You know, that plays a factor here too, and that's why Hunger Games seems, to my mind anyway, looks so much like the world in which we live. What do you think?
Okay, well, I'll tell you a little bit about the horrible Guardian column that I responded to for Rare recently, because this is a this guy. It should have been a joke. It was such self-parody. He basically writes that the Hunger Games, Divergent, The Giver, which is from the 90s, but I guess they just made a movie of it. All of these, you know, dystopian fictions for sort of younger audiences. You know, young adult. The Giver was kind of middle school aged. I read it ages ago. That the enemy in all of them is the state, and somehow, therefore, that translates to what this fellow called a right libertarian thing. And he kind of was calling it propaganda and was mourning, like, the decline of, I don't know, more left, like, corporate control type dystopias in sci-fi. And at the end of it, he literally suggests progressive parents, like, maybe reconsider allowing your children to read these books. And it was completely horrifying, because honestly, the lack of the suggesting that people shouldn't read these books was actually more horrifying than even, you know, any ideological warfare going on. I think a leftist could take the Hunger Games and could get some of their own lessons out of it. You know, they could use it to reaffirm certain things they believe. I do think that that there are a lot of libertarian lessons in it. There's the state. There's the main character goes poaching all the time because the markets are controlled. There's mention of little sort of market stalls that are, you know, they're illicit. And later there's all this stuff about sort of keeping your principles. You know, they make the character fight to the death with these other people, and unless she's in a circumstance of being directly attacked, she doesn't go around, you know, killing people to win. She tries as hard as she can to kind of keep her morals. And later in the series, there's, you know, the full-out war, this revolution that, you know, it's justified in that this is a horrible tyrannical state, but it really pulls no punches in talking about this war is going to be awful. And most interesting of all to me, the government you may replace your tyrannical one with may be exactly the same. So there's some stuff beyond, oh, the mean, powerful people are being mean to me, which is why I like them, and I actually think the movies were even better than the books. I guess
it's a little shocking to think that like a century ago, that the left and liberalism would have been was almost entirely anti-statist. I mean, they understood that the source of despotism in the world is the state with its censorship and militarism and so on. And it's just bizarre that in 2014 that you would get this article like The Guardian, you know, it would somehow see the state as the friend of liberty rather than its opposite.
Well, I don't know if that writer is very interested in liberty, but he wasn't even doing the traditional liberal twisted optimism thing where it's like, well, sure, some states have been bad, but, you know, darn it, next time we'll get it right. He seemed to be objecting on some sort of horrifying principle that the state should ever be the enemy in a story at all. And from a story standpoint, the state is a great enemy because it's the meanest guy around, it's the biggest guy around, it's the guy that can kick your door in and take away your loved ones. You know, and I mentioned Star Wars in my piece, like, who does he root for? Moral quandaries about blowing the Death Star up notwithstanding, you know, does he root for the Empire because they're... How can you even react to fiction like this? I mean, the real world is, I suppose, another matter. You can justify all sorts of things, but in a fiction sense, it was so baffling. I had to write in response because I was actually so irritated I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, I hadn't read the article yet, but I've read a few responses to it. Let me ask you, Lucy, what is your sense of what it means for us socially, culturally, politically that these movies, these books are so popular among young people? Do you see that as a foreshadowing of good things, or just an indication of a cultural shift? What's your feeling about that?
That's something to consider now. Sort of the teen younger audience sensation before all the Hunger Games was, of course, Twilight, which I read and hated, as many people do, because it was just sort of a soppy love story. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of thing, you know. It has its place in the world, and it's appealing to especially younger people for reasons. But comparing, you know, sort of the lessons of that kind of thing, like, you know, you get everything you want, and everything's lovey-dovey after, you know, not that much drama. But the Hunger Games, I mean, spoiler alert, you know, in the third book, and all the things are over, our main character clearly has PTSD from what's happened. It's a very oddly real, like, trying for a certain type of realism. And as I said before, the state, you know, a justified rebellion can still be this nightmare. There's some big issues there, and if that's appealing to, you know, 15-year-old girls, I think that's a good thing. Now, whether that, you know, is bringing in the grand libertarian moment, as people like my former Reason colleagues like to say is just around the corner, I don't know. You know, dystopian novels, which I love, have been popular for a long time. 1984 and Brave New World and Anthem and all that good stuff. And, you know, they were reactions to 20th century totalitarianism. I don't know what it speaks to. I'd like to say, you know, I'm generally optimistic about it, but I don't know if I have any grand hopes about it. It might just be a literary trend. I don't know.
We do live in digital times. I mean, there's a generation now being raised entirely on an online culture that's basically a product of anarchism. You know, the app economy and the gaming culture and social media and everything is entirely a product of spontaneous order, not the state, and that's very different from previous generations who lived basically in a state-based world. I mean, you know, I was born you know, in many ways at the height of the Cold War, where the state was the center of all politics and all thought and social and cultural happenings. So that was the critical thing. There's nothing like that anymore. The center of our world is being generated spontaneously through a global culture of digital engagement. And so I guess I probably have to count myself among the utopians in that sense, mainly because there's been a structural technological change in the last couple of decades, don't you think?
There is, though, the sort of menacing drawbacks, of course, which is, you know, the NSA and the total lack of privacy. Though I have my hopes that can be fought, but I guess one thing I'd worry about with the internet, you know, and technology saving us all is that people a little bit younger than I am generally don't even think about it. The internet is just like this second skin, which is great, and it may be, you know, I know some people like Harris Kenney, who I was with at Reason, and he went off to do tech things, have this sense that just like that's the sphere that's going to save us all, and sort of like, you know, the state will just become so inconsequential, not some grand overthrow. It'll just sort of be, we can do anything now, so don't even, you know, you over there withering away. But I don't know. I think that the internet and technology is a bit more double-edged than I would like it to think it is. I think that there's some dangers that if we all get used to being spied on all the time, which we already sort of have, there is a drawback. I am an optimist, I swear. I just am trying, you know, I don't know if I can prove my optimism. That's always been my problem.
You know, I understand exactly what you mean, and I think there is something. It's interesting to think about what the future looks like in a world with an anachronistic state that's basically regulating all the technologies of the past, and history moving forward, you know, with a kind of a globalist anarchist spirit, increasingly dominating our lives and our culture, but we still have this gigantic apparatus out there, this Leviathan that's taxing us and trying to force us into a central plan. It is intriguing to think what that looks like. It strikes me that everybody needs to make a more conscious effort to kind of free their own lives. I mean, that in the future there's going to be a sort of division between the compliant and the non-compliant. And we see that already emerging, I think. We're probably just at the beginning stages of that. That's my own feeling about it.
That sounds good to me. My one problem is, and I don't feel like I'm, you know, I haven't done this yet enough in my life, but again, going back to my my hero, Radley Balko, he really despises politics. You know, I think he'd like to sit in Nashville and drink bourbon and watch country music, which sounds great. I also aspire to the fact that, and a lot of recent people are like this as well, but Balko has done the most concrete good in the world, where like you'd love to ignore politics and free yourself and all that good stuff, but there are people who can't because they are, you know, absolutely in the jaws of the state. It reminds me of Wendy McElroy's most recent book, where she has a whole chapter about like the two different Henry David Thoreaus. There's the one who, you know, said you got to throw yourself in front of the state, the one who went to jail, albeit for a day, over the Mexican-American War, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. And then there's the one who came out of jail and went berry picking with the boys from the village and looked around and said the state was nowhere to be found. I mean, it's like the whole, he encompasses like each option. And the question of which one to be, I guess, is that's been something I've been thinking about before I could have made the Thoreau comparison. I've been thinking about that since I was like 14.
I'm excited about it, about that book, because you know that I've never read it. I'm embarrassed to admit that, but I've never read it. But in the next couple of days, I have a deadline actually to write a book summary, an evaluation for laissez-faire books of Walden. So I'm really looking forward to digging into it and gaining my own impressions of that book.
I haven't ever tackled Walden. I know people dislike it. Civil disobedience. There is the one sentence where he says he's not a no government man, and I like, pretend that's not there. But there's like, I mean, some of this beans is like anti-state poetry. You know, there's a couple lines in there that if I ever like got a tattoo, I would want it. You know, I'm blanking on the lines, but they're really good.
Yeah.
It ends with "I will breathe after my own fashion." It's good. I actually haven't read a lot of the Liberty stuff I'm supposed to, which is my shameful admittance. I did happen to read Wendy's book and a couple of other ones, but I have some holes in my general econ knowledge. Econ's a little trickier for me.
Lucy, it's okay. I mean, you know, I've recently admitted publicly that I'm only now reading Atlas Shrugged, if you can believe it.
I haven't read Atlas Shrugged. I tried. That's the worst part. I tried, and I was like, I can't. I've read Anthem. You know, that's our slim Ayn Rand.
Yeah,
Rand is tricky, man. Rand is
tricky. It's Anthem's in the public domain, so it's a little more accessible. But Atlas, I'm about a third of the way through it, and I'm impressed. But there's some laugh out loud moments for me too. You know, so it's been a kind of a mixed experience, but fun. But the best thing about reading the literature that you're supposed to have read that you haven't read is that it gives you the right to talk about it. That's the number one benefit.
I should get on that then.
Yeah, that's right. So Lucy, it's really been fun hanging out with you, and thanks for your podcast on Liberty.me. It's really popular, and I enjoy it very, very much, and all your involvement in our online community and all your wonderful work. And it's beautiful to see you again. And I hope to see you again very soon.
I would like that. Thank you for having me. It was great.
Take care, Lucy. Bye-bye.